So let's talk about using technology with therapy. Traditionally, therapists have great difficulty with technology, unfortunately. It's one of those things that therapy is rooted in all of these traditions, and it's just this face-to-face thing, and this is the only way to do it. And we can do individual therapy, and we can do group therapy, and maybe couples counseling, but that's kind of the extent of what therapy does. So, one of the things that I'm really worried about is therapy being left behind. Just as things change, there's more technology, and if the mental health field doesn't keep up with it, then people aren't going to be so interested in doing therapy anymore. So, I'm definitely a big proponent of doing online therapy using technology in any fashion. So I definitely use video conferencing with my clients on a regular basis. Sometimes we just simply use the phone, and that's something that just helps tremendously. So, since we've been talking about substance abuse all along here, that's one of the trickier things to deal with when you're not face to face with the client. And let me talk about that just a little bit here. So, obviously, if you're at a distance, you are less able to help someone who is going through some kind of a crisis or an emergency. The best thing that you can do is say, well, call 911 and get some help, and that's about all that I can do for you. And not always a good feeling. So, we do have to go back to the more traditional roots that if someone is abusing a substance and it is very it's very severe, then doing anything at a distance is not going to be helpful. It's too extreme. So there are times that I say to people, no, I can't do phone or video with you as a result. But nonetheless, there are plenty of people who they are abusing whatever substance, and it's not an emergency, it's not a crisis or anything like that. They just want to get better, they have good motivation that they want to stop, and that kind of thing. And it's completely legitimate to use phone or video in these types of circumstances. So, what I do is definitely do many of the same techniques of therapy, and we just simply do it at a distance, and that's something that helps tremendously. So, if you think about how can you use technology that is going to make the experience better, is well, first off, is if you only do the face to face stuff, what happens is you're not able to meet with your therapist nearly as frequently, often. And, at least for myself, I'm a much more flexible person if I can just, use my home office where I'm at right now and just simply talk with somebody for a few minutes. Maybe they don't even need an entire session. Maybe it's late at night and I've got some availability, or it's on the weekends or something like that, and I'm able to be there and help people out. So if you have to wait on an office visit every single time, you have to book an appointment and you have to go in, and it's a 45-minute session. It might take you half an hour to get there, it might take a half an hour to get back. Before you know it, that's a couple of hours out of your day. So it definitely is helpful to the client to be able to have maybe more frequent sessions, or it's just more accessible to them to be able to do that. Um, Plenty of times I have clients that they do quite the mix. So they will come in to my office, once a week, do a video chat with me once every couple weeks or something like that, and it works quite well. I've found it to work really well for when people have, I wouldn't say emergencies, because I want to stay away from that. They need the in-person services if they're dealing with that. But it's just more of the urgent, I need to talk this out with you, I've got this problem that's going on. And be much more accessible that way. So I find that to be very helpful. And I think that therapists should not shy away from this because it's something that I think everybody uses, and we don't want everyone to be using it with the exception of therapists. So, but nonetheless, we do have to be aware that there are some concerns about this, and maybe part of it is who is on the outside of this frame here. So, if you're doing a session with someone, you think that it's just you and them, but are they being honest that no one else is in the room? Or is there someone else in the room and or just in the house and they're able to overhear what is being said, so then confidentiality is broken. So those are some concerns in that area. And I always talk with my clients about how they need to close the door behind them and be the only person in the room. And I urge people to use earbuds, because that way they can't, other people in the house, if they exist, are not overhearing what I'm saying, and they're keeping their voice low. So I've had that happen before. I can think of a couple of clients that have had like thin walls, and they were whispering, and they were really worried, and thought that their parents were going to hear them. So I was saying, well, we need to find a better location for you. And sometimes it turns out, you simply need to come to the office to have that good space. But nonetheless, I think that many times doing some kind of phone or video conferencing is something that's very helpful. I've also got some clients that I do some secure email with, and I like hushmail.com, and they set up all the security for you, and you're able to do that because email in and of itself is inherently unsecure, and you would run into HIPAA issues and so on with that. So it becomes very helpful for many of my clients to just be able to send me some short or sometimes long emails and do some sessions that way as well. So if you think about it, many people are really good with the written word, but verbally not so much, or they're dealing with such a hard issue, especially substance abuse has all this guilt and shame and many facets to it. If you can take your time and it's just you and your keyboard, maybe you're able to send a message, and it might take you a couple of hours to create that email, and it might be not that long, but there's just so many emotions that it may be multiple hours. And then as a therapist, I'm able to read that and come up with a good response, or at least talk with them face to face, or on the phone or whatever, and be able to discuss that. So it's kind of a way to get more for your money if you think of it that way. And some of my clients, they just love that. So that works well for them. It definitely does. And then I have some clients that they'll just give me short text messages, just keeping me up to speed on what's going on in their life. So I definitely think that it's important to come at therapy from a few different techniques and not be that traditional face-to-face. Some people crave it. I have some clients who say, no, I do not want to do anything but face-to-face with you. And, like on my website and so on, buckblack.com, I've got some information about doing phone and video and all of this. And some of my new potential clients, they will say, I do not want to do the phone, I do not want to do video. And that's their first message to me. So I'm like, okay, well, that's not your thing, so let's not force you into that. So we'll do the more traditional stuff. So I have found plenty of people who they only feel comfortable using technology, so that's the route that we go, assuming that their situation isn't like so severe that face-to-face is warranted. And then I've had people who they say, okay, well, I'll try video conferencing with you, and nonetheless they're not comfortable with it. It just feels too weird to them. So then we say, okay, we're not going to do that, because the client needs to be comfortable with it. Because if the client isn't comfortable with whatever mode they're doing, it doesn't work. And another thing that I do with my clients is we'll walk outside if it's a nice day. And I used to have an office in right next to a fair-sized park here in town, and we would walk in the park, and people love that. And now the office that I'm at now has a long sidewalk, and much of it is wooded, and it's still a nice area to talk. And haven't found any confidentiality issues with that. You rarely run into people, and if you do, you just kind of pause what you're saying until you pass, and people never really pay any attention to what other people are doing anyhow, and it's something that Americans are criticized for. So that works out pretty well. It helps to loosen people up. So it's definitely important to look at it from a few different perspectives and not get too caught up on that traditional stuff. So the client, they really need to find that therapist that works for them. So if they are, comfortable and they like the mode of therapy, then that's what works. If you look at the research, that is definitely something that is the biggest part of it. It's not necessarily, do you use this therapeutic technique or do you use that therapeutic technique? It's, does the client feel that they have a good relationship with the therapist and that they're helpful? So I think that's a big one. So we definitely need to meet the client where they're at, and that's kind of a cliche in the therapy world. But nonetheless, it is not only finding the right mode of therapy, but also making sure that that the therapist is able to ask the client to do appropriate things. So for instance, if a client is, let's say that they're drinking, I don't know, a 6-pack per day. So if the therapist asks, okay, why don't you not drink whatsoever? Then that's not an appropriate kind of thing to ask, because often the client isn't able to do that. If they're able to, fantastic. You would ask them, why don't we scale this back? So why don't we reduce your drinking? And often clients can do that kind of thing. So if they can come up with something that works for them and feels reasonable, then you taper down. And the term for that is called harm reduction. And harm reduction is somewhat of a controversial aspect here, because some people believe in abstinence only. It's, you come into therapy and then you stop and there's no excuse for you to ever use again. And I've definitely been in therapy offices or organizations that have more of that attitude. For some people that works well, for other people it doesn't. And my perspective is, what abstinence is best, and if you work on tapering down, then that's often what works for people. Again, if somebody comes into my office and they say, I want to stop right now, I want to, I don't want to drink anymore, I don't want to use any more pain pills, I'm done, then I'm going to support that. So you just have to make sure that that the therapist doesn't come up with the idea that is completely different than what the client has, because it's never going to work. So that's definitely a big thing to watch out for. I think that so many times what we do is just find a therapist and don't do too much research or anything like that. And then it's not working, maybe because of those differences of ideas. And then the client and the family just gets stuck in the same issue time and time and time again. The therapist said, you need to stop completely. The client's like, well, here's all the reasons that I can't or that I don't want to or something like that. And then there's just this gridlock as a result. So we definitely don't want that. And so what I would definitely urge people to do is to make sure that they are, doing the research on the therapist beforehand to see what their perspective is. And then, you're going to you're going to make the better choice, but ultimately you can't figure all of this out for sure. So once you start therapy and get a few sessions in, see if it feels right. If it doesn't feel right, then do some more research, find someone else, do something different. Nonetheless, we do kind of have to be careful with the clients, especially substance abuse clients. They're more likely to want to skip around to other therapists because they don't like to be held accountable. Sometimes that does happen. So I think that would be something for the family to watch out for. So if the family sees any of these clients who are hopping around, then the family needs to say, hey, this isn't working so well, and urge them to stay with one therapist. So it's a tough mix here of finding the right therapist, but yet sticking with it and not letting the client do all this manipulation. So that's definitely something that's fair to be brought up in therapy. And again, if you can do a few different things, so as far as some 12-step meetings in addition to your therapy, then that's something that's very helpful. So that way you're getting different perspectives. So think about it. If you're doing some, I will say individual therapy, it could be IOP or whatever. The inpatient is a lot less common, so I don't reference that so much. But IOP or inpatient, so if you're doing that, if you're doing your 12-step meetings and you have a sponsor that is part of your 12-step meetings, you have got a significant number of people giving advice to you and you expressing your concerns to them. So you're getting a lot of different perspectives. So I think that's a really good thing. I know I'm jumping around here a little bit, and I do apologize for that, but I mean, there's just so much to it, and I'm trying to think of all of the good things to discuss. But going back to the technology piece, you can do meetings online, and that's really cool. And you can do some of the old-fashioned forums, online forums, messaging board kind of things related to these AA, NA, whatever meetings. So that's really good to supplement your therapy with. So using a little bit of technology there. And there are a lot of apps out there as well. So you can get the Big Book, which is the name for the AA manual, and you can get an app that has that. So it's kind of like the Bible of AA, and it has all of this information and all of the things that AA stands for, and have that on your phone. So I mean that's a really good app. There's some apps out there that are all about that's a counter of your sobriety. So you put the date in there that you became sober, and it keeps track of that. And so that's very nice as well. And plenty of tracking different moods and emotions, apps for that, apps for relaxation, dealing with anxiety, and that kind of thing. So I definitely use technology in that kind of regard with my clients as well. So I don't think that it should be all 100% technology and we should never meet or anything like that. But nonetheless, I think that it's fantastic to be able to have some of those apps and accessibility to be able to do that. So that way, it's not just simply the old stodgy therapy, and you just check in once a week or whatever. Because a lot of times people, they need more than that. So that's something that I find that is very helpful, and I get a lot of a lot of clients that just appreciate the fact that I interface with them in different areas and that different modes, and it's not just only making an appointment in my office. So I definitely think that's something to think about. and we'll see therapists be more comfortable with technology as time goes on. And I mean, it's getting better, but it's not nearly where it needs to be, at least in my opinion. So, nonetheless, I'll continue to advocate for technology, and I just hope that the therapeutic community keeps up with it, and I have hope that they will.